Okay, so tonight's conversation is about the cannabis industry and particularly the legal cannabis industry and the social and community implications of that industry in the various states and localities where it has been legalized. So previously, if for those of you who were here, we talked about the business side of cannabis. So what does it mean to get financing? What does legal work look like around cannabis, real estate, all of that? And how do people create successful businesses or investments in this space? So that was a very powerful conversation. And if you haven't seen the recap on that and you weren't able to attend, check out the blog on the Shalon site, or feel free to get in touch with me or any of our speakers who are listed on the Shalon event page. They're more than happy to answer questions and go into more depth if you have specific things that you want to know more about. Tonight's conversation about the social and community implications really focuses in two areas, if I'm going to be very vague, the positive and the negative. So as Gary mentioned earlier, some of the positive elements of the cannabis industry are tax implications and some of the money that's being funded into infrastructure in the states where this has been legalized, and some of the ways that it has enabled communities to have more opportunity in spaces where they weren't necessarily enabled before. In the negative side, we are talking about equity or the lack thereof, and how this this industry, cannabis, and basically how its history and its association with the war on drugs has really impacted different communities in very distinct ways, and what that means for people who are looking to get more involved, to change their life or the way that they do business, and what opportunities their family and their neighbors have. So I'm definitely not an expert in this. I'm very curious about it. I'm very passionate about it. I love learning about all of these things, and particularly learning how I can be more of an ally to people who need allies in the space where there is less equity than there should be. So I'm very, very excited that we have 4 incredible experts joining us tonight. And because we have such a small group, everyone's going to really get a chance to get to know them. I'm going to have each of them do a quick intro, and then we'll move into some conversation. So just going through my video screen, I'm going to start with Shahida.
Good evening. My name is Shahida Shabazz. I am an attorney. I am practicing at Errant Fox. We're a national law firm, and I'm based in the San Francisco and LA offices. I advise cannabis companies on regulatory compliance. So licensing, modifying licenses, and complying generally with the state regulations pertaining to cannabis operations. And prior to joining my current firm, I was a government attorney. So I've seen both sides of, developing the regulations and then putting them into practice with private companies. And just on a personal note, I'm particularly interested in the criminal justice reforms that are being adopted as a part of the legalization of cannabis. So very happy to be here this evening.
Thank you so much for joining us. Jocelyn.
Unmute. Hi, I'm Jocelyn Kane. I do a number of things in cannabis. I'm in the Coachella Valley, which is the California desert, like Palm Springs area. And I am the vice president of our Chamber of Commerce for Weed, is like what I like to call it. It's the Coachella Valley Cannabis Alliance Network. It is all the businesses and the plant touching and what we call ancillary businesses around, right? Including like lawyers like Shahida that work for and with and about and around the cannabis industry. I also work for the city of Coachella, which is a very small city in the Coachella Valley, who has embraced cannabis. I am the cannabis liaison. I'm the cannabis department. So from a government side, I am trying to work on our social equity program. As little as we are, we got $500,000 in the last funding round from the state for social equity. So that was a lot of money to us. And we're working really hard to refine how to better stand up equity businesses here in the city, where we're literally 99% Hispanic, origin. There's almost no one else in this city, and so it's really important that be the focus.
Thank you so much. Sheena. You're muted. Yeah,
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Sheena Roberson, and I am the founder of Cannabis Noir. Cannabis Noir is a organization, a platform dedicated, designed, developed around building equitable cannabis spaces and helping to foster genuine opportunities, equitable opportunities for both the cannabis industry and community. So we work really hard to make sure that systematically overlooked demographics have access to learn how to start businesses, how to build successful businesses, learn more about the industry, how the infrastructure works, connect with different specialists and industry leaders who have gone through this, understand it, connect them to forms and production and distro and shipping, and try to make sure that they are able to position themselves to create scalable opportunities. And we also work very closely with the medical community to make sure that folks are registered and that they understand how their cannabis and their medicine works with their bodies, how to implement into their daily self-care, and why it's important that we understand that cannabis is medicine. Overall, though, majority of our time is spent in the advocacy space, where we're working very hard to create regular opportunities for returning citizens and those who have been adversely impacted by the war on drugs. Much of our community and population has been adversely affected in one way or the other. And so while we look for long-term solutions and are very adamant about creating legislation and opportunities to rewrite and sort of refortify what the judicial system looks like. Right now, we are working very hard to do real-time work to support those who are in need of resources, aid, and education as they are going through this process now. So we host expungement clinics and we hold regular resource fairs. We do a lot of community outreach work because we want to make sure that we stay as connected as possible to the folks who are adversely impacted, so that as we are building out these spaces that will allow them to, that will foster more opportunities, we want to make sure that we're addressing all of the direct obstacles that they're facing. And a lot of time that can only happen when you're there to do the work kind of one-on-one. So we're blessed that now that we have grown, we have chapters in multiple states now. So we're looking to host regular expungement clinics. We work very closely with National Expungement Week. So we'll be plugging in our folks there. But we're looking to try to create more of a broader footprint with the work that we're doing and try to help as many people as possible access this space as successfully and safely and shame-free as possible. So.
Thank you so much for the work you do and for being here. And last but not least, Carlton.
Thank you very much. My name is Carlton Williams. I am the founder and CEO of New Life CA. We're a vertically integrated cannabis company here located in Oakland, California. Also, I am one of the first equity applicants to come with the first wave of applicants from the equity program. What that is a program that was developed here in Oakland first, where the city of Oakland gave perks and priority permits to those who were considered a victim of the war on drugs. So the way you qualify for that is either you had a felony conviction after 1996, or you lived in a district that was hit hard by the war on drugs for 10 of the last 20 years. The way I qualified for equity is that I lived in a district that was hit hard by the war on drugs for 10 of the last 20 years. I also am the founder of the Green Huddle, which is a outreach program. And in this outreach program, what we did is actively went out to the street corners and found folks who were on the black market still selling illegally, and did more of a wraparound approach to help them with their state and city licensing. So that's in a nutshell. That's who I am and what I do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just so honored to have all of these experts with us because they come with such breadth of knowledge, and clearly they're passionate about changing the world, one industry at a time. So we're so lucky to have them. And what I'd like to do is start out with a question, first asking any of our participants to share an answer if you feel comfortable. And then I will ask that our experts jump in with their own answers. So let me read out our first question, which is, why is the topic of the community and social impact of legal cannabis so important? And how does the community impact of this industry differ from other industries? And what makes it an important that is relevant right now, either because of its past and the war on drugs, or because of the financial impact it could have? So if anyone who's a participant has any ideas about that, I'd love to hear where you're coming from. Too shy? Okay. Well, I think we can then ask our experts to weigh in. And I don't know if anyone wants to go first, but this is, I think, something that all of you have a lot of feelings about.
I guess I'll start it.
Go ahead.
I can start it off. You go for it. You go.
I was just going to tell the group about how I was recently reintroduced to the topic of social equity and the criminal justice reforms. I was a part of a book club discussion group last summer. So while all of the civil unrest was happening and there were marches happening throughout the country, I was introduced to a book called A Knock at Midnight by a woman named Brittany Barnett. She's an attorney who was a corporate attorney, now has a nonprofit that focuses on getting people off of death row who have been convicted of nonviolent crimes just for selling drugs primarily. And she also happens to be the daughter of a woman who was convicted of drug use while she was a child. And so to hear her personal story about growing up in this environment, and then how it impacted and basically came full circle with now her doing the work to help people, basically solving the problems on a one-on-one basis by getting people off of death row, but also doing broader advocacy work like Sheena was mentioning that she's doing. It just really put it into perspective to where we're not just talking about numbers, we're not just talking about policies, we're talking about people and lives that are significantly impacted. So I think that's why it's so important.
Absolutely. So many people are impacted negatively for crimes that don't even necessarily exist anymore in the states where cannabis has become legal. So there's a lot to do to fix that. Jocelyn, did you want to go next?
I was happy to let Carlton go ahead.
All right, thank you. I feel like it's a super important topic. One, to kind of rectify a lot of the damages that that have been caused by the war on drugs. I don't think that when we talk about equity and we talk about the war on drugs, people normally they don't understand the depth, how the kind of snowball effect when we talk about, cannabis being a Schedule I drug, folks been snatched away from their households because of it, locked away in prison, and you have so many young men and women without two-parent households, and without that extra income, what it does, the snowball effect. Now there's not the family structure. Now we deal with a community that has lack of education, and in the war on drugs, the insertion of Schedule I drugs by government entities into these communities, it becomes it was a chemical attack as well. So what we have today is a lot of folks who don't have the education, who didn't have the opportunity to generational wealth, and who never had the opportunity for their parents to leave them a house or leave them anything but, maybe a bill at the end of the day. So I think that's super key, is one, to rectify the wrongs of the past that's, well documented. Another thing is on the positive side is the opportunities that that from the cannabis industry, unlike any other industry, that there is a lot of untapped sort of opportunity here. One, when we talk about the sort of economic economic opportunities that's in cannabis for districts and communities that's hit hard by the war on drugs. So folks who really didn't have the chance at this sort of generational wealth, here's an opportunity. Also, the tax dollars that it provides that can help with the relationships between government and community and so forth. And then we talk about the medical sort of, benefits that we haven't really scratched the surface of. Because of it being federally illegal, folks haven't had the space to actually do the proper research. So I think we're just now scratching the surface. There's so many benefits to it. There's an opportunity to rectify some of the damages caused by the war on drugs. There's opportunities to tap into some of the medical research and figure out some more healing benefits of the plant itself. And there's also the community, the social and the community aspect of kind of healing the districts hit hard by the war on drugs, using cannabis as a tool.
Absolutely. And I think we'll get into more of a depth on a couple of those as we keep talking, but that's, I think, a lot of good reasons to have this conversation. So Jocelyn or Sheena?
Yeah, else? I mean, I guess I just want to be super clear, right, on the notion of this is an industry, but it's a big, huge industry. And as Carlton said, there's multiple industries inside what we call an industry. We're talking about agriculture, we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about retail, we're talking about other ancillary businesses around that support those, distribution, it's a bunch of industries. So it's so much opportunity. In addition, legalization, whether it's just to the medical side and or medical and adult use, and I don't like to use the term recreational personally, but is being sold on this issue of righting wrongs and taking the moment, of Black Lives Matter and social justice, and then pursuing that at the level of legalization. And then what we really want to do as an industry is follow that up with legitimately having those opportunities available. It takes a ton of money, a lot of money, millions of dollars to stand up these businesses. This is not, let's open a sunglasses store and order some stuff from China. That's not what this is. So you have to, as a government, if you say, does the people support this work figure out a way to do what, you know, is being promised. And that takes a lot of resources and a lot of time and a lot of recognition. And in California, I'll tell you, 80% of this cannabis business is white men. And that's just facts. And that's because it takes so much money, and money is not flowing because we don't have access to banking. So I kind of want to lay that stuff out there because I think it's really important to say. And I'm just going to say it as a white woman, whatever. I'm a Jewish white woman, so I feel a little bit like less of a white woman. But I think that the slide, I don't know if everyone saw the slide around what is equality versus equity, and wanting people to really embrace and understand when they talk to other people that we're not talking about equality, we're talking about equity. We're talking about making up for something where people didn't have the opportunities, and there's generational damage, like Carlton talked about, so that you have to give more and then be able to talk to people when they come from some red state and say, you want to give a felon $1 million to open a business? And I'll say, well, yeah, because this is what we all said we would do. And I think I'm going to shut up now, but the concept needs to get understood to have like robust conversation, and we just need to be honest about it.
Absolutely. Sheena, do you have anything you wanted to add?
I mean, everybody, I guess, kind of did a great job wrapping that answer up. Those are all the points I think I would be touching on. But, you know, I mean, it's very obvious, I guess, for me. And you know, all of these points seem like things that are like very natural conclusions to come to as we think about why this would be important to this space and how. But I think it's not always as easy for everyone. And so, you know, sometimes when I because these conversations the way these conversations happen, I often forget that. So I think the best way to explain it from where I see, I guess, to someone else would be, you know, so we work in, I'm working on building out a corporate social responsibility program for folks here, because, you know, my goal was to set a self-precedent, self-regulation, kind of set a general precedent of what community expectations are, business expectations are, social equity, restorative justice expectations are, and encourage people to join this collective to start trailblazing the right way to do things, right? But in the sense of it, the foundation is, when you are a business, you have a social responsibility naturally to the community that you service, affect, or are operating in, right? And so, for instance, the oil industry, they have an oil spill, they clean it up, they take preventative measures to make sure the oil spill doesn't happen again. They work diligently to make sure that, you know, they are advocating for safer spaces for animals affected by oil spills, right? You'll see the partnerships with Dawn for cleaning ducks and these things, right? And so, and then even if you weren't the guy that spilled the oil, you're still like, well, look, this is, we adopted those measures too, so that nothing like that ever happens here, right? And so I say to apply that same framework or thinking to the cannabis industry, right? Like, you know, you didn't necessarily cause the war on drugs, right? But you're benefiting from this, you're in this space, and it's a part of this industry's culture. It's a part, the restorative justice and the social equity and the refortification of these adversely impacted spaces is a part of the dynamic of the industry. It's a part of how it was built. So it's not really a way to avoid it, but there are ways that you can say, hey, we're on this side of the fence of things, right? And then when we know that we've been adversely affecting folks, like, this is how we plan to make our restorative efforts. This is the things we'll do to kind of stay away from that. This is how we'll impact the communities that were adversely impacted. And so kind of creating a thought processes around how can we create sort of structuralized restorative measures, because that are tangible and measurable, right? And things that we know will be intentful and impactful for more than just the immediate need, but also the long-term initiative too, right? And so while we definitely want to clean up the oil spill, but we also want to make sure that preventive measures are still in place so that it doesn't happen again, right? The people who were adversely affected get help, right? And the poor little duckies who were covered in oil, who were born into spaces that were just oil ridden now, right? Like they need to be in better habitats later, right? Like we have to kind of create these infrastructures around, I think, more of a thought process of social and responsibility as a company, as a $1 billion industry. You have a natural responsibility, right? Like great power, great responsibility. You have a duty to the community, especially in this space, in this medicinal, like I agree with Jocelyn. I have a really hard time with the whole recreational thing, because I think most people are consuming medicinally. They just don't realize it because they're not as educated. But when you think about it though, like this is even more of a reason for folks to be as adamant as possible about making sure that they're kind of crossing their T's and dotting their I's as it relates to this space. So
Yeah, so many good points. I agree. I mean, for someone who does not have any stake in the industry at all, or the umbrella industry that is made up of so many sub-industries, when the conversation about legalization first happened, I could only think of positive implications. It would decriminalize a drug that I didn't think had such a negative effect on people's lives or on communities necessarily. I felt like the tax implications would be very beneficial to community infrastructure around education, roads, parks, whatever the case may be. And I thought, it would definitely open up opportunities for people. And it wasn't for a long time that I realized, it took something on TV or something to really wake me up to the fact that there was so much inequity in this space, and also the fact that the reason for the moves that had been made and the way that they were being made in different states, particularly, had to do with the history of the war on drugs and what, even the history that led to the war on drugs, and all of the governmental sort of issues that we're dealing with there that don't necessarily all have to deal with drugs, but deal with supremacy in some way or another, keeping different communities in power and other communities without power. And so that's what really piqued my interest. And I really have to thank Rachel for bringing this topic to my attention, since, coming from Colorado, living in California, it doesn't seem unnatural for cannabis to be a legal substance and something that people have really easy access to. But with Rachel being in New York and the legalization just happening right now, and having so much conversation about it, it's nice to have it top of mind again and understand, what should we be talking about and how can we do some of the things that would be preventative, as Sheena mentioned, so that we can avoid some of the mistakes that have been made, and look at this from a social equity place, as opposed to just giving opportunity to people, or not even people, potentially hedge funds or investment banks, who are there specifically to make money, but not necessarily to change the course of history, which is probably one of the most important things we can do right now, especially given everything that our country is experiencing around justice, equity, and community building and growth. So that's my answer for why this is so important. And probably just reiterating what everyone else said. And I wanted to ask another question, and this has been brought up a little bit, but we know that there are a lot of things that need to be fixed and a lot of things that could be better in this industry, but it also has a lot of really positive impacts, both from the medical perspective as well as the financial perspective. So I'd love for people to talk a little bit about some of the wins that they've seen or experienced, or that really keep you motivated. Because if it were all hard, I don't think any of us would stick with fighting for this. So, I don't know if any of our attendees have thoughts about, the positive impact of the legal cannabis industry in their community or in general. No pressure. If not, I'm happy to let our speakers take things over again. And I have a few ideas that I can recap at the end if they're not repetitive. So, anyone want to jump in? Some of your wins?
I can kick it off again. I'll start again.
Great, thank you.
So three immediately come to mind. One is, so I'm originally from Chicago, and I've been sitting out the pandemic in Chicago. And there is a community college in the Chicago area that has created a cannabis certificate program. So it's like a quarter-long or semester-long program where they're actually training people who are interested in cultivation and running a dispensary. And so that's really exciting to see in a lot of community colleges and universities, programs to really educate people on how to get involved and become leaders in this industry. Another win is a nonprofit organization that I just became familiar with called Code for America. They do a lot of, Jocelyn shaking her head, they do a lot of work with government agencies. And in California, initially, the right to have your marijuana convictions expunged was a petitioner-based system. So if I had a conviction on my record, I would have to go to the court, fill out the application, pay the fee, request a hearing, and that was really intimidating for a lot of people. So a lot of people who were eligible for relief were not getting it. And so what Code for America did was they helped the counties throughout the state of California transition from this individual-led system to a government-led system where the counties were now taking the initiative to identify eligible cases on their records and go through the process of making sure people knew that they could get their records expunged. And then eventually through some of that work, the law in California changed, and now people have an automatic right to get their records expunged. And that's become kind of the standard in other states. So in Illinois and even New York, that's the baseline now, it's automatic expungement. So that's a huge win. And then third, what we're seeing now from the private sector is a lot of SPACs, so special purpose private companies, basically hedge funds or investors groups. They're pooling together funds specifically for social equity licensees, which is very exciting because, capital is a huge barrier. And for these hedge funds and investment groups to be formed specifically to help social equity applicants, it's really exciting.
Absolutely. One of the things we talked about in our last session was how the businesses that will ultimately succeed are not the businesses who have the best product or the most innovative product within their dispensaries, or even, the most personable salespeople and whatnot. But it's the businesses that have done all of the work in terms of financing and strategy, and have that long-term investment opportunity. So the fact that there are organizations that are working to get funding and equity to smaller businesses and people who were previously overlooked for those opportunities, I think is going to expand the type of business owners that we see in this space for the better, the much better. So anyone else want to add to what Shahida said?
I think there's some major positive things that has come along with the legalization, and one being the equity program itself. Like the city of Oakland here was the first city to create a law, Measure Z, which pretty much appointed a California or a cannabis regulatory commission so that we can have incubation and things of the sort. Now, this program most definitely wasn't perfect, but there's so much opportunity that's coming out of it. So, for example, myself, me personally, my personal experience, being a victim of the war on drugs, when I was, my mom was on drugs from my neighborhood. So when I was 8, my mom was found murdered in a Royal Park, like next to a creek. And this is a park I used to play at as a kid. And then my dad, at the time of her murder, he was in prison on drug charges. So this kind of resulted in me moving from family member to family member till I eventually became a ward of the state. When I heard about Measure Z and it was on the news, I looked and they broke down the criteria to qualify, and I was like, damn, that's me. I qualify for this. So then I went for it, and here we are 4 years later, and I feel like, I took a lot of lumps on the head, and I feel like I've just went through a complete college course, not just in cannabis, but in business in general. These are opportunities that if I wasn't so comfortable with cannabis and didn't feel as if I knew the industry already because I grew up around it, it probably wouldn't be here. But now where I am today, it's like, damn, I could kind of be I could have did bottled water. I could have did anything, with this same sort of formula. And it's just, it came about through cannabis. So for someone like myself and my situation, and with my upbringing and my background, to be able to have the opportunity not to just come into this new industry, but just to come into business. And like Shahida said, there's folks offering funding. There's private money out there. I learned a lot about real estate and how to leverage real estate for funding, just running, businesses, vertically. So much. Even right now in this second, I'm actually skipping out on a meeting with Cookies. They're upstairs. That's where I was, to have our product put in all of the Northern California cookie stores. So that alone is just, it's a blessing to even be here and be in this space. So I'm just one. So I'm sure there's tons of stories like this, or folks like me that are out there that are actually benefiting from this industry.
It's kind of refreshing, right? Because we are, like Sheena said, we talk to each other quite a bit, and we're a little bit of an echo chamber. So, we forget there's lots of people that don't know. When we end up talking about the kind of less than positive stories about people getting taken advantage of, and Carlton is smart enough not to have been taken advantage of, but there are quite a few people that see the opportunity but don't understand they have to be careful, because in a new industry, and it's not just cannabis, it's probably any new industry, there's people who are just looking to grab it and go, right? And so if you don't understand business or government compliance, and you don't have enough money to hire all the people that you need to hire, and you don't necessarily have the city of Oakland holding your hand, you can get ripped off. really badly, and it happens. And so I would love to sit and talk about a million successes, and I'm hopeful with all of Sheena's work that there'll be more and more and more of them. I'm hopeful that we will have a city full of Latino owned cannabis businesses as we move forward. But it's a tough road, and everyone who's listening needs to understand that, it's not just here's some money, go. We've got a lot of opportunity to just frankly teach people even if they never get into it, or give them jobs, because it's not all just about owning a business. It's frankly about employing people again to move out of this generational spiral, and give them opportunities in the industry, even if they don't own it, but hire people at fair wages. And this is a industry that is quickly unionizing, if it isn't already in the state you're in. California, it's coming hard, which is not a bad thing. I'm a union girl, but it's so well paid, with benefits. There are jobs to be had, and they should also be looked at as equity opportunities.
I wanted to say this to make it very clear. The education that I picked up through this program is from getting either scammed, ripped off, used, and abused during this process. So my education has come from, like learning how to deal with the city. It has come from, RFPs, going for grants, and feeling like I was the best qualified and putting out the best application, but getting the rug snatched from under my feet because of political reasons, just politics. Yeah, it sucks, but it's a learning curve. Same with the incubation, shady incubators. I've went through it all, like every horror story in this, from being robbed. I got robbed 10 times in 1 year. So, all of the horror stories. So that's where the education piece has come in. So anybody who's listening, there's a silver lining in everything. So, when you learn it, when you get an education not from a traditional school or like an institution, and you're getting like that, kind of boots on the ground sort of training, that is the education. All of the losses, all of the hardships, all of just everything. That's where the education comes in at.
Hard knocks, buddy, hard knocks.
Right.
Yeah. Unfortunately, learning the hard way sometimes makes for the best story way down the line. And hopefully you will have many, many, many more successes than the hard knocks and the lumps on the head. I do want Sheena to be able to jump in as well with the positive, wins that she's experienced before we move into breakout rooms. But also, before we move into breakout rooms, I want to make sure that people are able to ask questions. So even though we're not broken out, this is still meant to be an engaging, interactive conversation. So don't feel shy about, raising your hand or unmuting yourself and either sharing things that are relevant to what our experts are saying or asking them questions. Whether or not you have experience in this space or not, I think we're all here because we're passionate about learning, and particularly learning how we can make our communities better. And this is such an awesome opportunity to make things better through so many different areas, financial, business opportunities, social justice, social equity. So please, speak up, and if you have questions, or even if you disagree, it would be great to know, where you're coming from when it comes to the legal cannabis space, because it's only the beginning. We're going to see a lot of other things start to be legalized, and it's interesting to understand what that will mean for us as citizens, but also as members of our community, and whether or not we may become investors or even part of government agencies or committees that help regulate. So I encourage everyone to be part of the conversation ask your questions. So with that, let Sheena talk about greens, and we'll go into the breakouts, or we might stay here because it's so small. So
I think that would be nice.
yeah.
And then we have a question too.
Yeah, hi, I have a question. I'm Melissa. I guess I have two questions. My first one, well, this is all very interesting, and I've really never had like any formal education in cannabis. I just graduated college. My first question is, I guess, as like not really for me, but for like friends of mine, like there always tends to be like a discussion of like where for them to purchase cannabis, and like some of them will go, oh, I want to buy from like a black owned business. We went to Northwestern. But then there's like, oh, but then we just go to like the MedMen or like the whatever equivalent in Evanston. And that is we don't know much about it because it's convenient. I guess, like, are there any platforms that like makes knowing which like businesses are more like equitable, like more accessible? Like what are those resources? And then my second question is, I was just curious, all of you, where you see the industry moving in like 10 years?
I think Sheena had a response.
We have resources on our website for businesses that we're actually, it's called the Green Book. We're updating it right now. It's sort of a play on a old book that was a sort of safe travel guide for African Americans, of where they can go for like rest stops and where they could buy stuff that was safe as they travel along. It's called the Green Book. And so now we have a Green Book for cannabis of like who's safe, who's in compliance, who's a Black owned business, who supports, LGBTQ communities, and who's supporting veterans, right? And create this guide and this database. Initially, it started off as a very small, sort of like local thing. But since we have chapters in multiple states, we've been able to build out some of that. So we are refreshing it so that it reflects all of the states that our members are in. But definitely, as we continue to update, come back and check that out, because it's pretty much a listing of not just dispensaries, but like ancillary businesses, lawyers, marketing, photographers, pretty much anything you can think of, you can kind of get access to. There's also something called Inclusive Base that a group called Cannabis created, that they have online, that has a list of Black owned and LGBTQ owned and BIPOC different dispensaries and distributors that you can take a look at, that are open and operational, and have links and everything that goes straight to them. So yeah, that was why I raised my hand. But those things are there, so you can definitely tap into them to kind of help you out there.
Right. I would just add that, like, there are brands, and I think that also look for brands, right? That if you're in a particular state, right, that you can dig into each brand on Instagram or whatever, and they're going to be promoting, if they are, right, doing things in the space around equity, inclusion, LGBT, like whatever they're doing. If you want to, find a list of brands, and or it would be nice, I'm going to cross my fingers that potentially the dispensary you go to might have a bud tender that could tell you about the brands in the store that were minority owned. But that isn't always the case, but it's totally worth asking if your friends are just going to the convenient place.
Quick question to follow up on that. At the last Shalon, we talked about getting licenses for events. It could be a Coachella, a wedding, a business event, a dinner. And I'm wondering if there's any movement towards having minority partners or parts of the, contracts. Is that, I don't even know if that's happening, but.
Yeah, most definitely. That's so interesting that you brought that up. I am working with the city of, so I have an event license as well. And I'm working with the city of Oakland to do a once a month kind of open air cannabis market right in front of City Hall, starting in September. And so there is, some of that going on with the city of Oakland. I know here in the Bay Area and California, there is a lot going on to help you identify like socially conscious or equity brands. One of them, I went to the trunk because this is our packaging here in New Life, and on the back there is a seal right there if you can see it, and that's called the equity trade seal. And there is a coalition of equity applicants that we all put this seal on our packaging so you'll know who is authentic equity, and it's called the equity trade agreement. That's one thing. And then there's a lot of the larger companies, like now in the event that I'm at, Cookie, they have a group of equity applicants that they're looking, and they're creating a section that's just specifically for equity brands. So to kind of be like when you walk into the grocery store, you'll find, the certain like the Asian food section and so forth. A lot of the larger companies are moving towards having an equity section. So you should be able to just walk in, even into MedMen. I know a brand called Ma'at, who I work real close with. She got inside the MedMen store. So if you walk into the dispensaries and ask them, hey, where's your equity section for equity brands and equity products? And I think at that point, that's a good start, but you should take a deeper dive into the brand. Like someone said earlier, go onto their Instagram page, look for what sort of initiatives they're involved with, because, like now, it's crazy. Just being Black ain't enough. Like, I'm on the back end side of things, and I see a lot of Black brands that they Black, but they really ain't Black. So, a lot of times, big, folks will come in and they'll have some Black face, pretty much like, I'm George Foreman, but they're manufacturing and making all the money off the grill, but I'm on the front saying knock out the fat. So, I think it's, be real cautious about just saying, hey, it's Black on. I want to purchase this product just because it's Black on, or it's because it just may not, it may not be that way. So I would really look into, what sort of initiatives do the brand have going? For example, we focus on bringing opportunities to the districts hit hard by the war on drugs. So we do a lot of collaborations with the arts. We give a percentage of proceeds to local artists. Our events, we include other equity applicants, and through our Green Huddle initiative, we help launch other equity cannabis businesses. So that would be my advice. If you here in the Bay Area or in California, look for the equity trade seal. When you walk into the dispensary, ask them, hey, where's your equity section? And if they don't have one, tell them, hey, you need to get one. You know what I'm saying? So, look for that equity section there, and then dive a little bit deeper into the individual brand and see what their initiative is, whether it's, giving back to cancer or, helping out orphans or whatever the case it may be. Let's see what they're doing.
Yeah, that's such good information and things. It's easy to think about at such a high level, but to really dive into it is so important, because like you said, there can be a face to a brand that really doesn't represent what the brand does for its employees, its community, and long-term initiatives. So thank you, Carlton. I'm curious what people have to say about the second question, which is where they see legal cannabis 10 years from now. Whether from an impact perspective or even from the thoughts around federalization.
The first thing that comes to mind is acai. When acai first became really popular, it was like this magical, food supplement that could cure cancer, and it would make you feel healthy and give you lots of energy and help your skin glow and all these things, right? And so everyone was adding it into their foods and smoothies, and there were little restaurants and juice bars that popped up centered around it. And eventually the novelty kind of wore off to the point that it's just, okay, now it's another healthy food and we can move on with life, you know? I feel like in 10 years, cannabis will likely be on a similar path of just becoming more normal. You know, there will be more studies to show how it impacts people's health. I think that some of the taboo will wear off a bit. As you know, we have states almost every day. I get an alert where a state senate or house has passed a bill to legalize, and so we're definitely moving in that direction of normalcy.
I was going to jump in because it's so funny that Shaida said that, because I literally said like the exact same thing. Because I remember the craze, and my mom, before she passed away, had bought like tons of like acai like juice and like chocolate covered acai berries and like all these things. And I just remember thinking like, this must be like it, like this must be like the best thing since sliced bread. And then like maybe by that next summer, it was like she just was like getting the chocolates to get the chocolates and like, you know, here and there with it. And it was kind of like not the thing, the big thing anymore. But I remember how adamant she was about it. She's like, up, I have to go drink my ice, you know, like my juice and, you know, mash my berries. And it was like this whole routine and this regimen. And it was more of the process and the ritual of it than it was the actual berry, right? I think that it's the same thing, like Shady said, with cannabis, that that the novelty of it will wear off, and I think people, I think the benefit for it will always exist, and I think that if it's not tampered with and over regulated, that over time that people will get used to. We'll have more studies, like Shady said. The stigmas will begin to kind of to fall off some. We'll be able to kind of build from it. But I really think a lot of what's going to happen in terms of like financial long-term stability is going to be in like the textile stuff, the stuff that, like, you know, we can build houses, and the reforestation and the agriculture piece. We've been working really hard to like get connected with forums, because part of what we, you know, we want to do is use this space to sort of refortify the community at all levels. So that's, you know, educating them about food sovereignty, collective economics, mental health, and all of these things tap into cannabis at some level, right? Or we can use them as bridges to it. But it was when I started to see how much more useful it could be in those other spaces outside of the medicinal use. So it's like, oh, okay, well, this is probably, I mean, with the way our environment is going, the way our you know, global warming and our food and food sovereignty in itself, agriculture, growing farmland, like it just seems like naturally we may fall into a space where that may become a lot more relevant than we recognize it as it to be right now. But that's why I'm like, I totally encourage people to explore this industry in all facets, because it doesn't stop just where, you know, like at the in made men and cookies and medicinal or recreational or whatever. It doesn't just stop there. And I think people who don't really understand what cannabis is in its entirety see that and they're like, this is the end all goal. This is like where we want to wind up being, you know, and not even recognize that they have an actual like gift for something in another space that could totally, you know, propel them into another direction. Like, for instance, I had a woman who stopped me after an event like this that was live in Atlanta about what like CBD was and how it worked and what, you know, how you can potentially, you know, get into this space. And she comes up and she was like, this was so interesting. I loved it. Like, she's like, and she's like, I'm an accountant. And no, she goes, she was like, I'm interested in this industry. I'm learning how to do edibles and I'm learning more about this space. And I love, you know, like, all the different things you said about, you know, being in this space and understanding how it works. She was like, you know, I'm just learning how to do edibles, and I'm only selling to like my family and friends, you know, but like, do you have any suggestions on how to get into the space and like really branch out? Keep in mind, this is Atlanta, so this propensity for you to have an edible business is just not that great in the first place. And I go, well, what do you do for a living now? She goes, well, I'm accounting. I'm like, well, they need cannabis accountants. You do know that, right? Like a lot of them, they would love a cannabis account actually. Like, and you probably would bang that out way better than you would these new cookies that you just started trying to understand how to make, right? And so she's like, well, I didn't even think of that. Like, I didn't think that, you know, you could really know everything that they need in every other industry they need in this industry. So even as little as that, and not seeing the picture like, oh wait, I have these transferable skills I can use, as opposed to like trying to start a cookie business, right? Like, so I think that we may not see that the textiles and the agriculture pieces and all of those things could be bigger than what we expect them to be, like long term. So
And if I can jump in, Annette, I just kind of segueing with the accountant and the transferable skills conversation. There was a question that came in the chat about, can the industry ever normalize without banking rules changing and it moving from a cash only industry? The answer is no, it cannot. The fact that it is a cash based industry creates all sorts of safety risks. Like Carlton was saying, he experienced several robberies in 1 year. You have armed robberies, you have thefts, you have problems with paying taxes and accounting and record keeping and things like that. So it definitely needs to change. But there's this pressure that is building where, as the states gradually uniformly legalize, then the federal government will have to do something to address the banking situation, because that is governed by federal law. So, within that 10-year window, I would bet money that it'll happen. It's just a matter of when.
If I could jump in, and I agree with you totally that we will see some kind of federal legalization. Obviously, it could take many forms, but I also think I wanted to give you another sort of idea in terms of where the future and the normalization might come from our sort of broad look at this industry more as a cannabinoid industry, not as the CBD hemp or the cannabis. It's all one plant. So when people tell you it's hemp, not cannabis, it's one plant. It's the same plant. Okay, just know that. And I could get into it, but I'm not going to go any deeper. It is the same plant. And it's really the cannabinoids, all hundreds of them. And we only know about a few, and there's many, many more that are going to be what people are hopefully going to learn as we do more research about, that can help them find the wellness or the real medicinal use if in fact they have something that needs treatment with a high THC, or frankly they have a ton of other aches and pains that can be, or they can't sleep, or anxiety, or PTSD, or epilepsy, or all the things that we know are endocannabinoid system, and these cannabinoids work together to help. So what we really want to do, I think, across the board is start talking about cannabinoids. And it's a cannabinoid, it's a hard word to say, so it's easier to say cannabis industry, but it's a cannabinoid industry, to be honest. Hemp and cannabis and CBD and THC and all the different things are all what we're talking about, and it's all going to come in different forms as we learn how to make them, hopefully natural forms, like Sheena says, and not we want full spectrum and raw, and we don't want like a bunch of stuff made in a chemist lab. But be that as it may, I think what we're going to see, right, is 80% of the people buying cannabinoids in whatever form makes sense for them, whether it's a patch or a topical or under the tongue or whatever, for the things they need. A small percentage of people using high THC combustibles because they need to eat, because they have cancer treatment going on or whatever, and then there'll be this small lane of like Rastafari, like hardcore, old school, traditional party guys that just want to get high and get couch locked. And that's okay, but it's not going to be a big piece of the culture anymore. We're going to move away. And that's my hope. I hope that makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question, which I think around the next 10 years, will we see, in addition to sort of the federal banking and whatnot, more regulation that is similar across states? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think, I wanted to touch on that, on the in 10 years. I completely agree, that, there'll be more developments, and there'll be more ways to find out, like we'll find out and figure out more ways to manipulate the plant. We'll learn more about the cannabinoids, but I think it's also important to remember the terpenes that the plant provide, and a lot of the benefits of the terpene profiles. When you have like limonene, pinene, these different terpenes give different effects. And once we learn how to harness those terpenes, folks will manipulate products to say, so you can get a consistent effect. So I know with cannabis, a lot of times you can, you may smoke or consume, and you're looking to be giggly, but it makes you tired. Or you're looking to, stay woke or for focus, and it just doesn't have that effect because we're so unique. So I think that folks will, eventually figure that out as well. And to what Shahida and, what she was saying earlier, that the kind of hype of it will die out, and it'll be like every other business where, like popular culture drives a lot of industries. Even if you talk about pain and pain relief, like who's on your Icy Hot commercial? You see Shaq. Who's on your lotion commercial? Whether it has aloe in it or not, you still see these folks. You see Shaquille O'Neal on that commercial too, and Papa John's and everywhere else. So, the athletes, the arts, those sort of things will continue to drive the business side of it, the influencers. And I have to believe that, like, with the implementation of equity, that for folks like myself, I was listening to I think it was Jacqueline said earlier that they got $500,000 in their region for equity. There's a group of folks who already walked through that fire here in Oakland. So there's so many creative ways and so many things that we're just now saying, like, hey, this can work. You can make it work. And we're watching the city of Oakland just burn through capital, trying to help equity applicants where it could be used in so many different better ways. So I think that, like, in the future, 10 years from now, what we'll see is, there's these folks who've already walked the path that'll start branching out into these other regions, and we'll see some like a more even distribution of wealth in the cannabis industry, and it'll help some of these neighborhoods that are, traditionally disenfranchised. I think cannabis will help help some of the communities 10 years down the line. Like we're talking Detroit, where they're bringing cannabis. Chicago, like she said, the program that they have there at the junior college. I know Sacramento, LA. A lot of places are adopting this equity program. So I think we'll see some change through equity as well 10 years from now.
Yeah, that's great. So we've actually covered a lot of the things that we talked about in our pre-event conversation around, when you think of equity applicants, who are the people that you think of, and how does that impact the way that people are able to do business or be in this evolving industry? I'm just wondering, from anyone who is an attendee, when you think about opportunities in cannabis, are the social equity elements that have been talked about tonight something that comes to mind, or what are the reasons that you have interest in the cannabis or cannabinoid industry, and has this conversation changed your outlook in any way? Well, I'm going to put Rachel on the spot just because you are in a state that is, new to this. And I know that when people talk about the legalization in New York, a lot of it is around revenue and whatnot. So how do you, is this something that you think will become a bigger part of the conversation, or how it will drive? Because I know you have some friends or family members or colleagues who are interested in either getting into the business or who have already made a jump into the space.
And thank you for calling on me. I'm not that I'm an expert by any means, but the people in my family are white. So, different story, of course. They had some money, partnered with someone to get a license, I think. I don't even know all the story, but what I'm thinking about broadly is my job, in my job, I'm all about education. So I think New York has the chance, before they really roll it out, to have a program, a better online program that from the beginning, there is opportunity and there's follow through. And, that's something that I always get excited about because I am in education. So I hope that and once they did that, learning from all the people that have done that could be rolled out. That could just make a huge
Can I
impact.
add something?
Sure.
I also think whoever's going to win the mayor of New York City, that will be an interesting, well, I feel like that will affect all of this. What do you think?
Although I was learning earlier on the call that it's not the mayor, it's
Oh,
the
just
community,
kidding.
right? It's the community boards. And how are they elected, appointed? How does that happen?
Community boards are, I think they're appointments. I mean, they're in every borough. And then there are multiples of them in the boroughs that are, I mean, you're talking 9 million people. And there is an aspect of licensing that will be local control. And that's where those guys will have, it's a lot like alcohol licensing. What they did in New York was look at the way they do alcohol licensing. So if you know anything about that, when a bar wants to come and open, and down in the Lower East Side or whatever, they go to the community board and the community board says yes or no. And not based on science or anything. So it's really, it'll be a very interesting political maneuver. Like, we'll see what happens because there's an opt-out clause and New York hasn't issued any licenses. They haven't done anything at all. So it'll be interesting. But I do think, to your point, they sold this to everybody publicly as a social equity program, right? There's an aspect to it that was super important. All the lip service was done, tons of it. Will it really be that in New York? And we will see.
And even down to, speaking of the lip service, I've seen, so to answer your question, Melissa, there's the Cannabis Control Board, which is being formed in New York, which will be kind of the ultimate decision-making body for state licenses. So if you're curious and want to follow, there's an Office of Cannabis Management website, and they're posting information and updates there. But to Jocelyn's point about the lip service and how it's been sold as this very proactive, ambitious social equity legislation, they're saying that the goal is to issue 50% of all state licenses to equity applicants. I don't think that's possible. I just don't think it's possible. The pragmatist in me is, and seeing how things were implemented in California, I think it sounds good, but I don't know if it'll happen.
Well, it's not. And that's what incentivizes this conversation around, taking advantage of, right, people with the front and center, the George Foremans, because it can't, and it's a healthy, robust industry. You can't segment it like that. You know what I mean? There's a certain amount of organic that will have to be. And I know San Francisco also has some problems because they have set aside and aren't taking applications from anyone other than equity, and then they stall out, right? And it's not healthy as a methodology. So I don't know what the right answer is, but yeah, you can't just say, here, these are a set aside, and then just I guess, then what?
Yeah, I think this is a really good segue, actually, as we get ready to wrap up, because as always, time just kind of flies by when we're having these interesting conversations. But for the people who are on the call who are not in, in this space, what if we want to be the best allies or the best consumers or the best advocates for continued success or maybe newfound success in this space to help with the people who could benefit from it and communities that could benefit from it. What is, from each of you, if we want to call this like a lightning round, one thing that we could do to really be supportive about making this industry valuable to those people that it has the opportunity to help, whether it is or is not quite yet?
I guess I'll go. I always say to sorry, corrections. I am I almost made it all the way through. The concept that so if I guess when I'm trying to phrase this the best way, I often am speaking in places and my audience looks vastly different from one another, from event to event. And I try to resonate with the audience and create messaging and be intentful with how I'm speaking to people and about what I'm speaking about to people, because not everybody cares about the same thing, right? Everybody has sort of their own connection or soft spot or interest or pressure point to this space. And for some, social equity and doing the right thing isn't enough. That's not, if it was, we probably wouldn't need to have these many conversations about it, right? So I think making sure we understand who we're talking to, and then making sure we're creating dialogue that resonates with them and that reflects what their interests are, because you can talk at a group of people and say, hey, we have to give back and restorative justice and adversely impact communities and yada yada yada. If that's not their cup of tea, if you're talking to a bunch of white guys, older white guys in suits who are very disconnected from this community, for them it's like, okay, like, is it lunchtime yet, right? But if we can somehow connect this to what that demographic purchasing power looks like versus inside of this industry versus not inside of this industry, right? Like, if we can find ways to speak specifically to our audiences, I think it would help with a lot of what we're doing in terms of when we're talking about eliminating stigmas and breaking down barriers and kind of getting people on the same page. And we're not going to get them on the same page the same way, but we can all get them definitely to that same page, I think. And then on the other side is that when you have the privilege to be in spaces that other people can't be in, use your privilege to have those conversations that I'll never be able to have, right? So like, if you can be in a room and command the attention and genuinely get it from people who will see me and immediately tune me out based on what I look like, that's your superpower. There, like, you have a space to use your gift and your privilege, right, to impact in a different way. I will never resonate or penetrate the way you could, right? So I think using that and taking those opportunities to educate and have the conversations and bring up the tough questions and kind of address certain things makes a big difference as well. And I am very, very big on educating as you go, kind of thing. Like, never feel like, I'm not ready to be like an advocate for cannabis, or I'm not like a consumer, so I'm not allowed to, like, be. Everybody has this part to play. whether it's just talking to your loved ones, talking to your elected officials, teaching other people about this, you know, talking to people at your church. There's a lot of different ways that you can be involved and not be like a full-blown educated advocate who knows about like terpenes and endocannabinoid systems and like the regulatory practices, right? Like you can still be an active part of the solution for this. So
That's such a good reminder. I know Melissa has a question. Is it in response to this? Yeah, go ahead.
It's just a comment. I completely agree with what Sheena was saying, and like I just think the power of the individual is so important. Like I'm interested in the arts, and I think like telling people's stories is like super important to like get the word out. Like for instance, like I'm not a big like cannabis person, but I'll tell my friends about it. I'm not just saying that because my mom's here, like genuinely. And also like I don't know, it's like frustrating because like the men in my family, like you're talking about the white men in my family, like they didn't come to this, but like sometimes it's like even though it's not in their like wheelhouse, like it's still worth it to learn because it's impacting other industries. And something that I'm thinking a lot about lately is like even empathy isn't enough. Like how do you get people to like spring forward from that and also just like think outside of their like social circles, but also their like financial circles? Because I feel like people like really hold their money to their chest, but it's like it's not all about that. I mean, that's like very like anti-capitalist of me to say, but you know, whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. So we can all use our voices to bring the people who are closest to us into the conversation that they may not necessarily be comfortable joining, but if you do it in a loving way, then they learn a little bit at a time and we can all make progress. So thank you, Sheena and Melissa. Jocelyn or Carlton or Shahida, do you have anything else you want to add about advocacy or?
I feel like Marcia and Gary might have wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Alicia maybe too.
Go ahead.
I just had a little thing to say is I was really impressed by finding out that now, Sheena, you were mentioning having an actual list of companies that promote equity and you know, as long as those things are kept up to date and there's enough manpower to really look into those groups that say they do practice, to see if they practice what they preach. I think that's a great resource because as we all know, it's easy to say, well, let's just buy from a Black-owned business. But if you say, technically it's owned by Blacks, but it's not really, the profits aren't going to, you know, the people that you were hoping. So it's great to know that those lists are being made so people have somewhere to go for information. I'm very, very impressed.
thank you. I'm gonna make sure I share the link with you guys because we're updating and expanding. So we'll have like a whole bunch of different states up there. So no matter where you go, you'll be able to like safely find businesses that you can purchase from and support proudly.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Shahina with the kind of the self accountability and making sure we're leveraging our privilege in every space, and that goes for like all spectrums of people. And one of the reasons I'm saying that is because like equity, you know, a lot of times people associate equity and social justice with Black versus white or whatever, but like equity in West Virginia may look completely different from equity in Compton. So it's like, you know, when Martin Luther King was talking about, you know, I have a dream, you know, he got a stone threw at him, or you know, got rocks threw at him. But as soon as he started talking about the economic inequalities and made it a class thing, man, they took him out. So, you know, sometimes I think we get blinded by, you know, Black versus white or this, and it's really on a case by case basis sometimes, and that, you know, even in certain situations, I have to realize and recognize my privilege in the room over someone else who may not even be a person of color. So that self accountability, I think, is big, and making sure that we're leveraging each other to help someone that's less fortunate, no matter who it is.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else have something to add? No? I'm happy to wrap up on that thought, because I think accountability and remembering that everyone's coming from a different place and leveraging what keeps us strong as a united front as opposed to what differentiates us is so powerful. So I want to thank everyone for joining, and particularly all of our experts for bringing so much knowledge and passion to the table. This is something that I'm excited to share, because I'm sad that more people weren't able to actually interact with you, but I know that they're going to benefit from the conversation that we had and the information that I tried to capture, both through this recording, which will be magnificently not edited, and the notes that I took. So thank you. I hope everyone has a good night, and I hope that you keep in touch with one another as your interest grows or your passion for making the world a better place continues to increase. So enjoy, have a great night, and get some rest, especially those of you who are having contractions over there. Feel better. And thank you all again. I'll see you
All right,
soon.
thank you.
Good
Thank you
night.
so much.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thank you guys. Good night.